take over, Preston.
So we lost one.
This is making me dizzy.
No, I'm back. My name's
Hello.
my name's Brigida, not Brigida
Regina.
What's your name?
or BB.
She's a track star, everybody.
This is what I'm saying. Like,
We're in the
who's
present.
trying to compete with Olympians? I don't understand what's happening.
Nothing's happening.
Can you talk about how Candace is grubbing mad hard though? Just real quick.
I was just looking at that.
Going
What do you
in right now.
Let's try to. Let's try to get this started. Let's try to get this started, y'all. So who all here? It's Regina.
No, I'm back. My name's
Hello.
my name's Brigida.
Regina, I'm sorry. Manuel, Candace, Frederick, Tim, Leah.
This is what I'm saying. Like,
Manuel.
who's trying to compete with Olympians? I don't understand what's happening.
There's like all this echoing going on.
It's doing this weird thing where it keeps repeating what happened like 5 seconds ago.
Okay, so hey y'all, so check it out. So just so we can hurry up and get through the hangout, let me just introduce. Let's try to get this going. Then we can get into it, okay? So first of all, I just want to say thank y'all for tuning in. My name's Preston Perry, spoken word poet. And yeah, I just want to first congratulate you guys for making the cut. It was very, very difficult. Like it was a collective of 10 poets who like grinded for a couple of weeks to try to figure out, who all is going to be a part of this. Hey y'all, so check it out. So just so we can hurry up and get through the hangout, let me voice. And we can get into it, okay? So first of all, I just want to say thank y'all. Weird.
This is crazy.
That's what we were saying.
So when
It
I
keeps going
talk-
back.
So when I talk, can y'all hear me? Or y'all hear me like later?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, we hear you
No, we can
now
hear you.
and later, like the
I hear you
kids.
twice.
Now and later. Okay.
Like the candies.
Yeah, Brian said just in case y'all guys forget. But yeah, like I said, it was a collective of 10 poets who came together, watched so many videos, and you guys, came out to be the top 8. So give you guys a round of applause for that. Yeah. So first of all, I got a question. So who in here has heard of the storytellers? Obviously, you heard about the storytellers because you tried out for it. But the storytellers, just to give you a little background of the storytellers. The storytellers is an event that's within the Legacy Conference. It's the poetry event that's in the Legacy Conference. It's actually 2 years old. Prior to the storytellers, me and a guy named Carnage Turner, we would host some of the poetry events at the Legacy Conference, and I kid you not, it probably would like bring probably like 70 people. That was about it. It was hard to even get like 100 people to the poetry events. A lot of the people went to the hip hop events and other concerts within the Legacy Conference. But now, we had like over 100 people to try out for the storytellers. So just to see how much poetry and spoken word, not only in the Legacy Conference, but just in the Christian community, has grown. Period. It's a blessing to see how much it's grown. It's grown tremendously. I'm grateful to be a part of it, and we believe that you guys really have a voice, really have a gift, and we want to just invest in you guys. We believe in guys as gifts, so this is the reason why we decided to have the hangouts. Everybody always trying to get camera time.
I was just trying to see.
Pray for humility with Joe.
I was just
Pray God humbles him.
I was trying to see who was on the screen.
No, man, you don't need to see. It ain't
You
your
gotta get that close,
Back up.
sir.
But yeah. So in this hangout, basically, I'm gonna talk about 2 things. I'm gonna talk about the art of storytelling, and I want to talk about preaching the gospel effectively to the people. I think those 2 things are very important in spoken word. But I don't want this hangout to be just me talking to y'all and y'all just looking at my face and just not talking back. If you guys got questions, I encourage you to please answer. There are other people watching this hangout that can learn from you guys' questions, that can learn from you guys' input. So please feel free to ask questions, give comments, concerns, yada 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 yada. So before I start, I just want to quickly just ask everybody to introduce themselves, and I want you guys to tell me why do you write spoken word poetry, starting from left to right. So starting with Bridget.
My name's Bibi,
BB.
or Brigitte,
Brigida.
and I really like storytelling because from a young age I felt very misunderstood, and so I feel like storytelling gives us the ability to get as close to being in somebody's shoes or as close to empathizing or sympathy or seeing life from somebody else's eyes as possible. I also think that as believers in general, once we share our testimonies, that there's like a spiritual bond that's created. And so through poetry, I believe that there's been many spiritual bonds that have been created, even with people that I've never even met before. And the edification of the body has been highly increased because of it.
Oh, next,
Huh?
next person. That was dope. I said that was dope. Next person can just go ahead. You can just go in. Candace. Are you?
I'm done.
Your name Candace?
Wait, am I next?
What's
Yeah,
happening?
you're next.
I can't hear anything.
Oh shoot! I'm sorry. I'm at the end of my screen on mine.
Okay, I'm sorry. Maybe I'll call you guys.
Oh,
I thought it was
that's a
the same.
good idea.
So Candace, you're next. So tell us why you write poetry. Introduce yourself and tell us why you write poetry.
Okay. My name is Candace Lofton. That's my brand new name. Just got married.
Whoa, whoa.
Just got married. Candace Lofton. Very excited. I'm from Louisiana and moved up to Louisville for school. And so got a husband, got a job, and we're up here doing that. And I didn't know that I like to do poetry until I heard Sho Baraka's album Talented Tenth, and I heard his song Jim Crow, and I knew then that it wasn't just something that I liked to do, it was something that I had to do. And so through that and through propaganda and people such as your smoking hot awesome wife, Preston Perry, who have absolutely paved the way for young women like myself, I've just discovered that the Lord gives good gifts, and sometimes it's in words. So.
Cool. That's what's up. Shout out to Jackie.
Shout out
So
to Jackie.
next is Emmanuel. I think he from I know we chopped it up at a church somewhere. It's Virginia, right?
North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Yeah.
Tell us
So,
why you do poetry, bro.
cool. I'm Emmanuel Gaines from Raleigh, North Carolina. I've always been into writing, mainly because I had trouble communicating verbally. And then my wife introduced me to the spoken word scene from a Christian standpoint. And ever since then, like, I found the perfect marriage between me being able to express myself and then share it with other people. And so for the last 4 or 5 years now, I've really just been writing and using it as a platform to share my experiences, because I know that there are other people that are going through the same thing. So if I can just share parts of my story, share parts of things that I've experienced and gone through, I've seen it, like Regina said, edify the body, encouraging others. And so, that's the main reason why I write, is to get it off my chest and to hopefully edify others.
Cool. That's a nice, good answer. If we could just keep the answers short because we'll have that much time. But yeah, that's what's up, bro. Frederick Sims.
Yeah, what's up? My name's Frederick. I'm from Kansas City. I do poetry really for 2 reasons. I say like to love people and kind of to share what God's been like showing me, I guess. And so that first looked like I wanted to primarily like do my poetry for a church context, but how that's grown is different. Is like now it seems like I'm more wanting to reach like the poetry slam scene in my community. So more poetry for me has been like to express myself and because I love it, but also like to reach them and like build community there and share the gospel with them.
Cool.
That's what I do.
That's what's up. Jazzaray,
Hello,
how
my
you
name
doing?
is Jezere. Also Jez, that's fine. Born and raised in Philly. I write because I always have, because words are extremely dope and I'm obsessed with them. And I think that God has gifted us all uniquely to creatively display his gospel in different ways, and this is the one that I believe he's given me.
That's what's up. That's what's up. Leah Smith,
Leah James.
Leah James. That's what I meant
It's
to.
cool. I get that all the time.
I know you for so long, and I call you Leah Smith for no reason.
It's alright. I get that all the time from people who've known me forever. But I started writing after my mom died when I was 13. Poetry kind of saved my life. I really didn't have anyone to talk to, so I started writing, and I would write my letters to God and ask him questions. And I wrote from the time I was 13 to the time I was 19, and nobody knew. And one day I shared it at my college, and then I just got invites to speak at people's churches, and it blew up like crazy. Like I had no desire to be in front of people. So as I look back on how it happened, I realized that God really has given me a gift, because when I was 16, I had a stroke and I lost my short-term memory. So I'm not even supposed to be able to remember the words to my poems. So I believe for a fact that God has given me this gift just to give people hope, and I do poetry just so people can see that you can overcome anything.
That's
That's
tight.
it.
Tight. And somebody else just joined in.
Yeah, hi, Erome. I know it's hard to say my name. I would just say for you.
Okay, cool.
Erome, and I love starting with an idea and then the spiritual insight that God gives me as I write. That's the main thing.
That's what's up. That's what's up. So yeah, it's good to just hear from you guys. I can personally say that I think all of you really have an amazing gift. Yeah, from all of you guys. I learned from you guys watching you guys' videos. Yeah, so stay encouraged in that. Me personally, I write just because I love using language and creating things with language. I think the possibilities we have with language is limitless. You know what I'm saying? We can create so much. I like creating and I like storytelling. So I think that's one of the reasons why I decided to teach on storytelling. And the show is called Storytellers. So that's perfect, right? So me personally, now every poem doesn't have to like be a story. Like, well, I started off here and I ended up there, and this happened, A, B, C, D. Every story doesn't have to um, um, be like a story per se. Some poems is all personification. So we're personifying something to describe something in a creative way. We've seen people like Ezekiel and other poets, Jackie, do poems like that. But me, I personally think that storytelling is a lost art in spoken word poetry. I believe just like when you listen to a sermon, you listen to your favorite pastor preach. He starts off with this story to draw you in. I'm at my pastor's house, and we talked about this in our news today, to draw in to the text with the story, and then give you the gospel once we draw you in. And I think it's a lost text. I mean, it's a lost art in spoken word to effectively tell a story. Now, personally, I've seen people tell stories amazing in spoken word, and I've seen people who are all over the place. So I guess one of the goals of this hangout is to try to encourage you and try to teach you. Obviously, we're limited because we're not face to face, but to teach you how to write a poem and to write a poem effectively in a story. Now, the theme of the conference is Populous Day, which means people of God, and each of you will write a poem on that topic. And sometimes when we get to a topic, sometimes it might seem
Excuse
like
me.
you're limited.
I
Yeah,
don't mean to interrupt. I'm really sorry. But could everybody else mute their sounds that's not talking?
that's a good idea.
It's not a good idea?
Yeah, that is a good idea. That's a stupid idea.
Sorry.
Yeah, so no, it's cool. Thank you for that, BB. But yeah, so that's the theme you guys will be talking about is the people of God. Now, in that, it doesn't have to be cliche. You guys don't all have to write about the same thing. in that it could be anything pertaining to the people of God. So you have free range in what you write about concerning the people of God, but it has to be in the theme of the conference, which is the people of God. But in that, try to write somewhat of a story, a creative story that will relate with whatever message that you want to write. Um, like for example, my wife Jackie, she has this poem called "Eyes Like Judas." Put a thumbs up if you ever heard it. Cool. And as like Judah, she starts off with this poem, right? And she says, if I can go into the mind of anybody, who would it be? I thought about going into the mind of such and such. I thought about going into the mind of such and such, but eventually my mind became obsessed with the mind and the heart of Judas. And in that story, she begins to talk about Judas' journey from walking to Jesus to the point where he betrayed Jesus and to the point where he hung himself in the end. But she took you on this journey creatively, right? It wasn't a cliche story. The writing was creative, and the way she presented the story was, I feel, was very creative. And I've seen so many of you guys do that. I've seen Leah do that one time in New York. I forgot the name of the poem, but it was a really, really good story. Leah, I've seen Jazzaray. Your collab piece in New York with I forgot her name. Yeah, Sherelle. It was a very Sarah. I'm sorry. It was a very good poem, and I've seen a lot of you guys write this story, so I know you guys can do it. But yeah, like any questions when it comes to that? Anybody? Any?
No, I'm good.
Everybody got what they have to do with as far as storytelling? Cool.
Okay, sorry. So when you mean storytelling, you're talking about a specific style, right? So you're like telling us to this poem that we're working on is in the, like, for example, when I write poems, my poems aren't always a story necessarily. There's like rhetoric, which actually is rhetoric, which a lot of people use to get a point across, but you guys are specifically asking us to use the form of telling a story, right?
So typically when you see a spoken word poem, sometimes the spoken word poems are very just a general topic where you're just talking about something, right? And then you have certain poems that invite you into a beginning, bring you to the middle, and take you to the end of what happened, a story. So whatever it is, you can use somebody else's story, you can use a personal thing that happened into your life, but tell a well-written story about the people of God. It can be in any style. It can obviously has to be your style because we want it to be original. It could be any style though. We're not telling you to be confined with one style, but to tell a story effectively. And the way you do that is basically starting off with the beginning. You know what I mean? Building from the beginning, telling us the meat of what happened, and then closing it, having a smooth landing and closing it, and bringing it on home and making it all connect. So beginning, how did whatever you're talking about, if you're talking about Sarah walked to the store and obviously she, I don't know, she bumped into John and John took her home. It's like, okay, start off with her walking to the store, talk about what happened at the store, and then bring the story on home if that makes sense. But what I don't want you to do is try to go for somebody else's style that's not yours. Stick to how you write, but just tell a story. So Jackie Wang next week, she will be going deeper into storytelling. Me, I would just ask to present to you guys what it is that you have to do, which is to tell a story in your poem. So just have that in mind. Jackie Wang next week, she'll go deeper into how do you tell a story and all of that. Just to let you know that's you guys' assignment. So if you want to start it on it this week, you guys can. So the thing that I want to talk about, the main thing is really preaching the gospel effectively through spoken word poetry. Have anybody ever seen a poem where somebody was just a poem was just all over the place? It was just like, okay, I think you're talking about this, but you might be talking about this, and then you just threw Jesus in there. Like, honestly, have anybody ever seen that? Right? Put a thumbs up if you have, because you guys might be muted still. Yeah. So
I don't have enough
we
thumbs.
we all yeah, right. We all wanna be good writers and good poets, right? We all have a passion for writing, but obviously as Christians, as believers, our job is to effectively communicate the gospel through spoken word poetry. It's to effectively, like, when people walk away from our poem, they should only walk away from what we presented to them, but also, like, what is the solution? Like, when I was growing up, I loved Tupac. Tupac was my favorite artist. Um, I like Tupac so much because I can go in my room and I can listen to a Tupac song, right? And I felt him on so many levels. He talked about so many things that I could relate to, like when it comes to growing up without a father, growing up with a single mother, yada yada yada, and I would feel him. But the problem was when I listened to Tupac is every time I turned off a Tupac song, my problems were still there because he never gave a solution. He glorified the problem so much that when he turned the song off, it was like, okay, I'm still hopeless, you know. But as Christians, we know what our hope is. It's Jesus Christ, right? It's the Lord Jesus Christ who died on the cross for our sins, who called us to Himself, who saved us, right? So we effectively, in our creativity, we effectively want to communicate the gospel just as much as our metaphors, just as much as our punchlines, just as much as our storytelling. So I think that's the most important thing: is how do we effectively and creatively tell a story. I think that's my baby. Uh-oh. Yeah, how do we... Yeah, you got a question, Fred?
I just want to make sure I'm getting what you're saying. When you say communicate the gospel, are you saying, like, you're not saying, like, in every poem you should put, Jesus died on the cross, rose from the grave, can't believe, every
So
time.
that's okay. So that's what I was gonna get into. Thank you for answering that. So one thing I do hate, and this is just me. I mean, one thing I do hate is when somebody gives a poem and it's like yada yada yada. This happened, but Jesus. It's like, okay, that was kind of corny. It's like how can you creatively incorporate the gospel without making it mean cliche? And you don't necessarily have to preach the cross in every single story, but in it, especially if you're glorifying, not glorifying, especially if you're presenting a problem, you definitely want to give hope. But the way you give hope, it's up to you. You're the poet, you're the creator, right? It's up to you, but you definitely want to give hope in some creative way. To give you an example, um, uh, I could just think about one of my favorite poems that did so. Um, Ready or Not by Ezekiel Genetics, right? You guys saw that poem? It was an amazing piece. So basically, what they did was they personified themselves. Right? Ezekiel was the church. Genetics. No, Ezekiel was Christ, and genetics was the church. And they talked about all of these issues, right, within church and the beef that God has, with some church folk, and how we abuse the church, but God will come back for a spotless bride. He will come back and save His church. They talked about all of these problems, but they gave a solution really creatively. Like, they didn't just, but Jesus, like, by them originally personifying themselves as the church and Christ, they were able to get the gospel out of that window. Does that make sense? Without it being cliche, because it was created from the beginning. And I think that's what I think that's one of the lost arts, especially in Christian spoken word. I see a lot in the secular arenas, but not in Christian spoken word. We talk about a solution that's cliche. So when we present the gospel, it's very cliche. Does that make sense? So if your poem is just very general, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's no present the gospel, because your poem, before you presented the gospel, that wasn't creative. If that makes sense. So trying to find creative ways to talk about problems and solutions, so you can have a creative way to present the gospel, because that's all spoken word is. It's teaching. It's communicating effectively, creatively. That's all spoken word is. So writing poems from a creative standpoint whether that's with schemes or creative writing. So yeah, does that make sense? Did that answer your question, Fred? Cool. Any more questions?
Preston, I already broke rule number 1. I'm just.
You good? You good? What's your question? You got a question? No? Okay, cool. I thought you had a question. So we got a new person that joined in the hangout. You want to introduce yourself? The lady with the hand on her knee.
You're
I can't
still
hear you.
muted. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, unmute yourself.
Can y'all hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sierra Jones, Baltimore, Maryland. Nice to meet all of you, all of your lovely faces. Sorry I was late. I was having technical difficulties.
Yeah, we were too.
Yeah.
Man, I want to just say I really loved your poem. Your poem started off kind of creepy. Like you were like did y'all see your poem? She looked like a creep. I was like, oh,
Yes.
It was really good.
Traumatized slightly. Don't watch that joint in the dark when you
You
first watch
say you
it.
look like a creep?
Boy, y'all ain't gotta do me like that. Stop it now.
I like
but
the way it ended though.
you didn't remain a creep.
I thought I
You
was
said,
gonna
like-
get cursed out, truly. Like I was like, what's she about to say to me? Oh, yeah.
I just felt like she was about to swing or something. It was the facial expression.
Y'all gotta chill. Stop.
You
Back to
said
the
a creep,
lesson.
no, a creep.
I'm gonna be all the way real with you. Like when I first saw the poem, I was like, oh my goodness. And then I started watching it. I was like, whoa, this girl can really write.
Wow.
So
Thank
yeah,
you so
like
much.
I want to tell you that I really enjoyed your poem a lot,
Thank
a whole
you,
lot.
Preston.
Shut
Yeah.
up, bitch!
So,
I'll smash your teeth in, whore.
what is?
Oh,
That's the devil.
What is that?
I'm gonna beat the living hell out of him. I'm probably gonna kill him.
I think there's an open way for people to get into the chat somehow.
Oh, it makes me sick. You can go to hell.
Oh,
Really weird. Really.
ISIS has invaded your
so that's
hangout.
somebody.
I think if you just click ignore, they will go away.
Oh my god.
Wow.
Yeah, they're gone.
So that's somebody letting the devil use them.
No.
That was really
That's
dumb.
what's up.
ISIS though, yeah, that's clever.
Yeah.
ISIS tried to
That's
hack
what
the
happened when you
hangout.
I'm pretty sure ISIS
That's what
does
happened when
not
you have
care about our Google call.
Right. So if you guys can just mute, so it won't be like multiple people talking at the same time, I would really appreciate it. So before I go to the next portion, like, does anybody have any questions? Like any questions? 'Cause like it doesn't have to be what I talked about, but it could just be about poetry. I really want to open the hangout out with just questions, and we can talk and we can learn from one another. It really doesn't matter. Anything pertaining to spoken word.
Through this process, will we be able to send you guys what we're working on? Like,
Yeah, definitely. I think the main person you guys have been in contact with, I don't know who you guys just
Fuck you,
popped up.
you piece of shit! You fucking shit!
Man, this is
I win 1-0. Oh man!
I ignored them.
What's funny?
I clicked
What's
ignore.
funny?
Did that work?
yeah.
How do y'all ignore? How
Brian's
do you
trying
do
to
it?
my pastor's trying to figure out how we can stop people from like joining in because
We gotta yeah.
I don't know everybody who follow Legacy is not believers. Yeah. Apologize for that. We all heard curse words before.
We grown. Yeah, that's crazy.
Just pray for them. But yeah, so I think you guys have been in contact with Etowan, right? So she's probably like one of the main person you guys can contact when it comes to that. But if you have like poems, you can always send it to me or Ezekiel or Genetics. We would love to help you with the process, even with your poem that you'll be working on for storytellers, for the poetry slam. You can send it. You can email me or email Ezekiel or one of us. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. That's what's up. Any more questions? Leah, you like you got a question, Leah? No? No? Okay, cool.
I'm good.
Oh, Huh?
Hey, I got a question.
Okay.
Your process when you build a poem, because I've been thinking about the process of building a poem, and I know for everybody it's different. So, what is your process? I mean, do you start with an idea? Do you start with a piece of scripture? I mean, where do you start?
Okay. Yeah. So me personally, I usually can't write unless I'm inspired to write about something. I think my last poem I wrote. Well, my last poem I wrote with Joe, a manhood poem. But prior to that, it was a poem about Mike Brown. And yeah, so I wrote a poem about that. So I'm usually it's usually sparked with inspiration, with something that's dear to my heart, and just physically writing it out. Me personally, I think about my ending. I know a lot of poets don't do that, but I first want to ask myself is what do I want to communicate with this poem, and what do I want people to walk away with. And I typically start to think about how I want to end the poem, and how I end the poem really dictates how I write the poem. I know a lot of poets don't do that. My wife doesn't do it. Other poets I talked about don't do that, but I do it only because I think the ending is so important, and I think the ending really communicates. It's just yeah, it really communicates what you just talked about. So it's like how do I want to
I just ignored him. Did it work?
yeah, it worked. Yeah, like what? How do I effectively want to communicate this piece? But I think just for a writer period, I think you really want to start off with like what do I want to communicate with this poem, and what do I want people to walk away with. Um, that could be anything, but I really encourage poets to write about things that you're passionate about, write about things that affect you, write about things that write about things that affect you. So when you communicate that poem, it's heartfelt, you know. So basically, what I mean is, don't look for topics to write about. You don't have to look for topics to write about. Write about things that affect you. Write about things that happen in everyday life. It can be anything, but give a solution. So, for instance, I saw the Mike Brown situation, and I saw that it was hope in that situation. Why? Because I know Jesus, right? So I talked about the situation, I presented a problem, I gave hope, right? I had a dream one time about heaven, and I wrote about it. Yeah, my testimony is my real life experience, so I wrote about it. Yeah, so I mean, and then it's gonna be times when you read scripture. So I think inspiration can come from all over the place. But don't I would encourage people not to fish for things to write for. Just let it come naturally, if that makes sense. And write out of that window. Any more questions?
So in regards to that, right, Preston? So since we have a topic, it's a broad topic, but we have a topic. How would you suggest? Because writing for specific things that I'm asked to write for that don't come from me is always harder. Though
Yeah.
of course, like there often is a more of an end goal in mind. But how would you suggest broaching that topic? Would it be the same way to consider the broader topic and then think about what has impacted, inspired, or affected us concerning the people of God, or
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's one thing that yeah, I just want to apologize because I know sometimes when people give you a topic to write about, it can seem hard. You know, it's like you seem limited as a writer because you know we want to write from something we're passionate about. But honestly, you in the people of God, it can be from as broad as talking about what happened to the girls in Africa, or we could talk about what happened to Bill around the corner from your crib, who's a Christian. I mean, it could be any story. It could be about you because you're the people of God, right? But we want to just target lives, basically, in the Christian community. So you can talk about somebody who's not in the body of Christ, um, who did something that affected the people of God, or anything. Like don't limit yourself. Don't just think people of God, people of God, people of God, but think people of God. If that makes sense. It makes absolutely no sense if you think about it.
But
Right.
it does make sense. I got
But
you.
it does make sense. That's how poetry is sometimes. Yeah,
So
yeah.
we do have to talk about someone.
It doesn't have to be about a particular person. It
Hmm.
could be just as long as it's about the people of God.
The people of God. Okay.
Yeah, people of God. Yeah. Frederick, got a question? Did I see your hand raised? No. Anybody else? Cool. So let's talk about some poems. Like, do anybody have any examples of poems where it was targeted on the people of God? Uh, can anybody think of any poems? And let's try to break down these poems. Like, anybody?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Genetics poem, Forever and Ever.
Forever and Never. Remind me of that poem.
It was her last poem at Rhetoric.
Right, yeah. So she talked about the church, and the church, like people in their church, from two different perspectives. She talked about the real charismatic church, and she talked about like people like in more reformed circles, more conservative Christians, and she compared the two, and she was basically saying like we shouldn't hold on to any of these two things too tightly. The gospel is the main thing. So whether I come to church and I want to just sit and be quiet, or whether I come to church and I want to scream and shout, as long as I love God, I think that was like the meat of her story. As long as I love the Lord, that should be the main. And that's a perfect example. So what she did was she just presented an issue, two issues, and she did it in such a creative way. Now, genetics, she's really good with double entendres. She's real good with metaphors, and she's real good with just run on themes. So she did this whole crazy thing with like the video games. She named video games that I never even heard of. But she did it in such a way that was creative. It drew you in, and it just blew your mind. Now, I'm not telling you to be like genetics, because all of you guys are creative in your own way. But in talking about the people of God, I definitely want you to come from a creative approach. So, and I think that's one of the reasons why you guys were selected, because all of you guys had a creative approach to your poems. You, Sierra, you, yeah, like your writing was really good. You were talking about. Remind me the name of your poem, Sierra.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I had to unmute myself. It was pep talk. So I was kind of talking to myself.
Okay, so can you just explain like the meaning of your poem and why?
Yeah. So I was listening to some. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Vodi Bakum, but listening to some sermons by Vodi Bakum, he was just saying how how the saints of today, sometimes we try and distance ourselves from the people of Israel, and how they were stiff-necked, how they were disobedient at times, how they were doubtful at times. And it's just like I saw that in myself when I wrote this poem, how they were cowards sometimes. And it's just like, okay, so just comparing, I guess, myself sort of like to the people of Israel, and just, they say, so that they can be anybody. The they was me, my flesh, like, yeah, you stuck in Egypt. Yeah, you just like the Israelites. Yeah, you got a stiff neck and all this other stuff. And just kind of breaking that down, and then getting to the solution, which is, you know what, I am set free. I'm not in bondage to sin, and, I can keep pushing, stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's the reason why I love spoken word so much, is because everybody has a creative approach, and that creative approach is like literally them. It's how they present poetry, and the way you just even broke it down. They say yada yada yada. They say yada yada yada, but then they say you communicated this story. You gave this story about what you wanted to relay. But the thing was, they say, you know what I'm saying, and you use that to your advantage. You use that to creatively tell a story. That was good. Your poem, Candace, you did the poem in the car, right?
Yeah, I'm guilty. There was a train and neighbors going by, like the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, your poem was very transparent. It was very honest, and to me personally, I think one of the reasons why you were picked is because I don't think any of us have ever heard a poem from that perspective. So just your story itself, it came from such a creative approach, and your writing was really good. So it came from such a creative one. It's like, man, first of all, we never heard anybody talk about that topic, and we think interracial couples, it's really it could be a huge blessing in the body of Christ. One, but you came from such a creative window. Like you know what I mean, and you creatively told this story. Like you brought us into the story. Now you don't have to be a Dr. Seuss storyteller. Like you don't have to, like, but you creatively, like, you brought us into your life. We like literally, like, am I wrong? Like, guys, like we literally like felt her, like her situation, like the things that she went through being in a biracial relationship. Like we really felt you, and we really felt like you invited us in your situation with the poem. So I encourage you to even do that with the poem that you write for storytellers, to continue to do that, to tell a story creatively, and even how you approach the poem. Like it was a creative approach. It wasn't just, he approached me and we started dating and he was black and I was white. Like it wasn't like that. You came creatively, and I just would encourage you just to do the same thing. Leah, Jezere, all of you guys really had creative approaches to your poem. So I would just encourage you to do the same thing with this poem, with this piece. Emmanuel, remind me of the name of your poem, because I forget.
The name of mine was The Cry.
Okay.
It was basically, it was a conviction piece for me, because the Lord was just really convicting my heart about reaching out to the other young men. And one day I was just sitting, talking with the Lord, and He just told me to start writing, and it just helped me to see things from their perspective. That they're reaching out, asking for help, and that we're seeing that through their behavior, through their rebellion. And so that piece was really written to myself, but I just felt like other people could draw from that too. That there are people there, young men, young women, crying out for help, crying out for the gospel, but it's like who's hearing their cry? So that's kind of where that piece came from.
That's dope. That's what I got from the poem too. It was really good. And even your poem that you did when I was in your city. I think you sent it to me. I forgot the name of it. It was it was more of a story. You talked about don't tell me. You talked about like church. The theme of it was church clothes, right? It was like people who come to church with this persona, and put on these church clothes. They really put on this mask to really mask like who they really are. Was that the name of the poem, Church Clothes?
Yeah, Church Clothes. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that was you told a really good story in that poem. You talked about you just brought us into the life of somebody who goes to church who was in bondage, basically. I mean, you told the story from that perspective, and I think that's what a good story does. It allows people in the audience to see themselves. All right, because when you do poems for audience, there's always somebody in the audience that can relate to what you're saying. And when you describe something in a story, like you're painting a picture of a lot of people's hearts, which ministers. And I think that poem really ministered because you did it in the church. The video that I saw, you did it in the church, who might have a lot of people in the church that suffer with that very same thing, come to church and trying to appear a certain way, but in their hearts they're struggling, they're in sin, they have no one to talk to, and so they have to put on this facade, this image, and you brought us into the story of somebody who goes to church and who might struggle with that. So I think all of you guys have done it in a way. It doesn't have to be a real detailed story, but you definitely want to allow people to see what you're saying in a story form, if that makes sense. Yeah, so that's all my notes. I mean, I guess we can just like, if you guys have questions, you guys can ask questions. If not, we probably could just pray it out. Maybe you got questions? Did you raise your hand?
Me?
Yeah.
I just no, I don't have a question. There's just a lot going on in my mind. that I'm thinking about. So
You
yeah.
want to share or no?
Oh, okay, yeah. I didn't know I could share. It was on my mind.
Okay.
I struggle with writing, with making sure that I don't do the cliche write a poem and then at the end, but Jesus type thing, because I've written poetry all my life, but um, it wasn't until I want to say college when it even dawned on me that I could tell the gospel through poetry or anything like that. So for me, I struggle because I write more of my creative poems that I don't share with anybody. I feel like have nothing to do with Jesus, and I'm like, man, I'm not a good Christian poet like at all. Um, like I didn't expect to get chosen for this because even when I was writing the poem that I did write, like I felt like it didn't end well because I didn't have the but Jesus ending, like because I was still wrestling with what I was talking about in my poem, and I didn't know how to end. I didn't know what to say to people because I don't know what to say to myself about certain things. So I feel like you guys do a really like you genetics, all of you guys on this hangout have really good ways of delivering the gospel, and it's like really good succinct way, but I always struggle with that in my poetry.
Yeah. I mean, I think, well, personally, I think your poem was really well written. I think your poem was really good, and I'm not just saying that. I think I think your writing is creative. So I think even when you present the gospel, I think good writing will always help your presentation of the gospel not cliche, because the writing isn't cliche, and I think I think the presentation of the gospel only is cheesy when the writing isn't good. If that makes sense. So I mean, but at the same time, you definitely don't want to have a whole bunch of poems that have the same type of ending, but Jesus, even if the writing is good. So you want to find creative. It's a balance. It's really a balance. Let me ask you guys a question. This goes for all of you. Do sometimes as writers do you feel limited in what you can write as a Christian artist because you're a Christian artist and you feel obligated to just give the gospel in every single poem?
Yes. Absolutely.
If you feel limited, raise your hand so I can kind of know. 1, 2, 3. Just 3. Just Leah, Frederick, and BB. That's it. Cool. I mean, yeah. I mean, sometimes I feel limited as well. I mean, and I think that could be a bad thing and it could be a good thing. One, it can discourage you to stop writing for the Lord, or stop trying to write things that's really Christ in, or it can stretch you. It can say, you know what, this is forcing me to find creative ways to present the gospel to the world. Uh, and I think that's a challenge for the believer. But in the gospel is so broad that we don't necessarily have to talk about one topic, which is Jesus Christ. We could talk about anything, you know what I mean? But we know that all things have a solution, which is Jesus Christ. Frederick?
Yeah, man. I want to say to saying Brigitta, is that your name?
Brigida.
Brigida, sorry. My bad. But like, I think it's good to have poetry, and honestly, I want more Christian poets to do this, to have like to show the wrestle of what it is to be a Christian. Like if you look at the Psalms, like David's wrestling a lot. Like it goes from like, I love you, Lord, you're awesome, to like, why aren't you answering my prayers? You know what I mean? And I think at times like that can be good for us to show as well, because I think sometimes like we don't show like the period of like, hey, yeah, like God brought me out of this, but there was also a period where I was questioning if He was. You know what I mean? I think there's a reality to being a Christian in that poem that you did that was really good. So I wouldn't be discouraged by that. I want to say that.
Yeah, that's dope. Yeah, you got a question?
I have just a brief statement.
Okay.
I think just to expound on what you said a little bit, in that like the gospel is a message of reconciliation. and in that Christ is reconciling all things to him. And so we know in a broad context that the solution is him, but what does that look like? So the gospel looks like, in some cases, what the people of God are doing to facilitate reconciliation. The gospel looks like how, I guess, like Frederick is saying, like there's this war of flesh and spirit, but there is a conquering spirit, right? But I think where we get limited is thinking, I think it's a theological limitation personally, that we don't believe the gospel does apply to every area of our lives. And if we don't believe that the gospel applies to every area of our lives, we'll never write about how the gospel applies to literally every area of our lives.
Man, you preaching.
This is when I mute myself right now, the microphone.
Right. And that's a really true statement, and I think the gospel, like, it applies to all aspects of life, like, right. For instance, right, you take the fall poem that me and Jackie did. Me and Jackie, what we wanted to do was we wanted to tell Adam and Eve's story, but we wanted to try to show how it relates to us today. So we was like, man, how can we do that? How can we tell that story about what they went through and show men and women their sin through their mistake, right? What Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, like how can we show them? So we was like, man, let's have a conversation after the fall. Like if Adam and Eve had a conversation after the fall, immediately after what they did, and God came in the garden, they hid from God, and God, talked to Adam and Eve. He cursed them and all of that, like how it would be. So we began this dialogue between each other, like, this real argument, right? So in that argument, we kind of show men and women, like, who might be in a relationship, man, we argue just like that at the crib, you know what I'm saying? Like man, so we started this conversation, but one of the things that we did was we was like, we want to give the gospel. We want to give the gospel in a creative way that will still be effective, right? Because that's what poetry is. It's writing creatively, right? Creative writing and performance, spoken word. And we was like, man, we want to give the gospel. So Jackie was like, man, what if I, as Eve, after we get done arguing, we kind of like apologize to each other, and then I begin to remind you of what God said, like in Scripture, and then we play off of that, and then we give the message of the cross. And I was like, wow, that's really genius. And she was like, remember what our God said when He spoke about seed. He told us the seed will come, the devil will crush his head, but the devil will bruise his head, but our seed will crush his head. Yes, we are dying, but one day we may rise from the dead. We are not hopeless. And then we went into this story of the cross, but we were able to do that because we built a story. We built a story that was really it was not fiction. It was fictional. You know what I mean? A lot of the things that we said, it wasn't in the Bible. We took a story, right? We took a story that actually happened, and then told a story that might have happened, a conversation that might have happened with Adam and Eve after they fell. And because of that, we were able to give the gospel in a creative window, if that makes sense. I'm sorry if that was all over the place. But yeah, I just want you to see that, like, their story applied to all of us. Like, Adam and Eve was a story that applied to men, that applied to women, that applied to children, sinners and Christians. It applied to everybody. And because we chose a story through Adam and Eve that applied to everybody, we were able to give the gospel to everybody, not just the church. You know what I'm saying? Not just the non-church, like, So just think about stories that you can present, that you can creatively tell a story, so you can creatively present the gospel in the end. That makes sense. Does that make sense? Cool. Any more questions? Remind me your name. Okay, she was first, and then you, Emmanuel. Remind me your name.
Erome.
Erome.
Yes.
Okay.
Can you talk about when creativity overshadows the gospel message?
Yeah.
How much of a bother
Yeah, I think
that
I think
is, and how to handle that sometimes.
what was the last part of your
Oh,
question?
I was just saying how to handle that. Um, it almost feels like there's friction sometimes. Like you want to be creative, but then you don't want to like have so much metaphor in there for people to think about, that they're thinking about how smart you are in getting it together, not necessarily the message that you're trying to convey through the word that you're speaking to them. So I
Yeah,
just wanted to hear you talk about that.
yeah. So me and my friends, we talk. Me and my a lot of my friends are poets, and we talk about this a lot. Like dumbing your poems down. And we definitely want to dumb our poetry down, but we definitely want to make it so it's edible for the listener, right? So typically, when the solution of what you're talking about is complex, the presentation of the gospel will be complex. The thing about spoken word poetry, and a lot, I try to tell people this a lot. Like in spoken word poetry, you only have 30 seconds to capture like the mind of your listener. The first 30 seconds of a poem is so key and it's so critical, right? So like the average person has ADD. They might not be diagnosed with it, especially when it's something that they're not originally used to, and especially with spoken word. So you have people who are in the audience, and it's like, man, you got 30 seconds to grab their attention. So you might not want to try to grab their attention with a really complicated metaphor. You might want to start your poem off really simple, but at the same time creative. Uh, so whether that's um, uh, yeah, I remember the first time I kissed her lips. That was very simple.
Mm-hmm.
As my heart began to flip, all more convictions beginning to rip, I grabbed the hips and kissed the bottom lips because I always wanted to try it. Wow, I have everybody's attention,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it's no way. Like I was in the room when Jackie did that poem. It was the first time I saw her, like on that stage doing that poem. Um, she had everybody's in the room attention.
Mm-hmm.
But she started off simple, and I think presenting a poem is the same way presenting a message, right? Like when you prepare a sermon, you
Mm-hmm.
want people to understand what you're saying,
Right.
and the metaphors doesn't have to be super complex, uh, you know, but you want to be creative, right?
Right.
For instance, um, a lot of times when I write, I might write a poem out, and I would go through each line and say, well, you know what? How can I still say this line creatively, but at the same time make it understandable? And
Mm-hmm.
I try to put myself in the shoes of my audience. So, for instance, I wrote a poem. My last poem I wrote, I said, I said, what was the line? I think I said, um, that night in the alley after the cop let me go. After the cop let me go, something. I was really mad. I was furious, right? Something along that. I don't remember, but I was like, man, how can I make this? I thought other things in the poem was really creative, but I was like, how can I make that line more creative but still understandable? So
Mm-hmm.
I rewrote that line and I said, after that night in the alley, after the cop released the cold grip of his cuffs from my innocent skin, I was a furnace ready to burn into a fist of fury, right? So I still communicated that the cop let me go, but I did so by explaining how how the cuffs felt on my skin, and explaining how I was mad, not by just saying I was mad, but I literally personified myself as a furnace.
Right.
Like a furnace is hot. I was hot, right? I was a furnace ready to burn into a fist of fury. I was angry, right? So when the audience hears that, it's like, okay, they still understand that I was mad, but the metaphor wasn't that complex.
Right.
It's really simple, but it's creative at the same time. So I think trying to try to separate like complexity and
Right.
creativity
Right.
always have to mean you have to be complex to be creative. You're very simple and creative, and I think trying to have the balance between the two is key.
But what about like in the spiritual? That totally makes sense. But like in that spiritual place where you struggle with, you know how Paul in First Corinthians says, I came to you not with eloquent words, but with fear and trembling when I came to present the message. So it's kind of like that that thing you like the eloquence might be there, but how do you put just in the spiritual sense? Do you know what I'm talking about? Kind of
Yeah,
a little
I
bit
think
past the creativity part where you have the eloquence, but you're like really wanting people. You really want people not to maybe get caught in the eloquence, but maybe get into the spirit. Is that something that the artist has some kind of control over, or is that something you just leave to the spirit of God to? Sorry, that's my question. Does that make sense?
it makes sense. I get what you're saying. I think one, not to just sound really cliche, but being spirit led in your writing,
Hmm.
to
Right,
pray
right.
God, like allow me to like communicate this message effectively.
Hmm.
But look at Jesus. You know, Jesus didn't come with fancy words, but he was really creative at how he presented the gospel,
Sure,
with
sure.
parables, with like illustrations.
Hmm.
Jesus was really really creative.
Hmm.
Look at David. You know, yeah, they were very creative. So it wasn't complex, but it was very creative. Jesus gave a lot of examples and a lot of parables, to allow people to see
Can I
themselves.
say something?
Yeah,
I think she's making a really good point, like about like not letting creativity outshine your message or whatever. But I think that we need to be very mindful of our audience as well when we speak. Like a lot of my poems used to be very preachy, like when I first started, like very preachy, like the whole cliche, my life sucked, blah blah blah. Here's Jesus, and then like that was it. But that was because I spoke in a lot of churches. And then I started doing a lot of open mics, and then I started doing a lot of secular open mics, and then I started being around a lot of non-believers, and my writing changed completely. So I feel like we need to like be mindful of who we're speaking to. Like in this instance, we're going to be in front of a lot of people who are already believers, but it's our job to still portray the gospel message. But I feel like being aware of your audience and who you're speaking to, because that's the ultimate reason why we are speaking for the benefit of people's souls. Just be mindful of your audience and what poem that you choose to perform, and that's helped me tremendously
yeah,
throughout.
that's a really good point, Leah. I think Ezekiel or Jeanette will be talking about that, like knowing your audience, and they be talking about that a little later on. So that was a really good point.
Can I just
Desiree?
provide a resource?
Huh?
So I have a resource. So this
Okay.
book, right? So it's probably backwards now that I'm looking at it, but it's
John
by John
Piper.
Piper. It's called Seeing Beauty and Saying Beautifully.
I
Even
read
if you
that.
don't read the whole thing, the introduction is like an excellent exposition on what it looks like to do that, to not compromise a gospel message, and really to do what Jesus did in his teaching and what Paul. Because
Can
it's
you say
funny
the name of
because
the book
it's
again?
called Seeing Beauty and Saying Beautifully by John Piper.
Yep, that is a really good book. I didn't finish it, but
Yeah, I think I just read the intro too. But the intro's super dope, and that was like what I actually wanted to get out of it. So
yep, it's a really good book. I think somebody else had their hand raised.
I was gonna say that's what my main struggle was I felt like I was writing these really creative poems before I started trying to stuff Jesus into them. And I would say paying attention to your audience is key, but also imagining yourself being your audience is helpful. Um, I know that what is your name? Sierra, right? Um, that you talking to yourself. That's why I say I love the way you ended it because it was so freaking. It would the theater, film, and television part of me was like, oh, like what a way to physically express what you were expressing through words. Um, but you imagined yourself talking to yourself the entire time. And I think that was what was so effective about your piece. Um, Not only was it just an afterthought, but it was like the whole intention of the poem. But a lot of times, sometimes I'm so worried about what am I going to say to somebody else as opposed to what am I saying to myself. So I guess make the message simple, and then you have room to be creatively free after the message is simple. But if the foundation is simple, your audience is a lot smarter than we tend to give them credit for. Like nobody had to, like the parable of the sower was like Jesus didn't have to say, okay, people. He didn't always have to like dissect his stories. He just told the stories, and people were like, yes, that makes sense, because they're living life just like you.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think Jesus was always aware of his audience, always aware. Everything that he did, it was calculated, and he was always aware of his audience. Even when he healed, um, the 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 man from blindness when he spit in John 9 when he spat in the mud and took the mud and put it in the man's eyes. Like it was a reason why he did that, and there's a reason why he gave. Like when the disciples said, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind, and Jesus says neither of them. This man was born blind so that the glory of God can be revealed in his life. And everything he did was calculated because he knew his audience. And later on, he comes back. He heals a man of spiritual blindness, and he did it in front of the Pharisees for a reason, right? So like we definitely want to, when we minister and when we present the gospel, we definitely want to be aware of our audience. In Chicago, me and my friends, we go to secular open spots a lot. I won't do the same poems that I would do at a church at some secular open mics. I just know they won't. Like I'm aware of my audience, so I want to be aware. Like if I'm going to out here in Chicago, we have a lot of open mics where there's a lot of black Hebrew Israelites, where there's a lot of Muslims. So when I go there, I want to do Jesus is God. Talking about the deity of Christ. I almost got beat up a couple times, but I want to do that because I think it would be effective in that particular place. When I go to a church, I want to do my poem Necrophiliac because I know that it will be effective because I know a lot of people in church are slaves to sexual sin, and they're afraid to come out like I was at one point. They're afraid to be transparent, so they come to church every single day, but they're slaves to sexual sin and sexual bondage. And then you have those poems that are neutral. You can do both places. I feel like me and Jackie could do the fall in the church, and we could do the fall at a secular open mic. You have those type of poems, but it's just really knowing your audience and presenting the gospel effectively to them. It doesn't have to be Jesus. It doesn't have to be Jesus came, Jesus died, he rose, believe in him. It doesn't have to be that. But even if you're talking about a boy in your poem, it's like even giving him hope through Jesus can give somebody else hope who's listening to you. Like Jesus died for you, bro. I got this poem it's real old. It's called Anonymous, and I just talk about her. Like, I know this girl. Her name is Anonymous, and Anonymous has this deceitful smile she puts on every day, every Sunday before she comes to church. She attempts to make up the mess sin has made of her a cover girl. She tries to cover up the wounds from her dysfunctional past, right? That's how I start the poem off. But in the poem, I'm describing this girl, and I give the gospel really short at the end. I just says, Anonymous, Jesus knows your name, and he's still waiting for you. I just say that. That's the only time I really give the gospel, and it's really, really simple. And I have so many people come to me like, man, I was anonymous. I was that girl who was in church and who was in a slave to sin, who was a slave to people's opinions, who was never a Christian, who acted like I was a Christian. Thank you for that. I presented the problem, and I didn't give a long presentation of the gospel, but I did give hope in the end that Jesus is still waiting for you to come to him. And it can be as simple as that. It doesn't have to be this long presentation of the gospel, and it can be. But just as long as people walk away like, man, I have hope, and that hope is Jesus. Make sense? Cool. You got a question?
So this session that we're having, this Google Hangout, will we be able to revert back to this, like see this after it's all said and done?
Yeah, I think it's recorded. You can just go on
Okay.
Legacy. Yeah, it's just the Legacy YouTube and see it, check it out. Yeah. Any more questions? Emmanuel?
Yeah, I was just a quick question. Because one thing I struggle with writing is ending a poem. Like I feel like all my like some of the best stuff and then the most creative stuff is in the beginning and the middle, but I struggle sometimes with ending. And so since you said that's kind of where you start at, I was just kind of wondering if you could give some advice or input on you know how to keep the creativity all the way through the poem, all the way to the end.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's one of my pet peeves. That's one of my pet peeves. I'm sorry, y'all. My little boo. Say hey, y'all. Say hey.
Hi.
He like, who is all these people? Yeah, so that's one of my pet peeves. It's like people who have really, 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 really long poems. Like, and I think the way you end a poem is to end it. Like it's that simple. Like literally, like I think. So before I go into like, let me get your question. I just don't want to, rant. Like, are you saying how to create how to end a poem creatively, or are you saying like how do I end a poem to not make it be long? Is that what you're asking?
I think it's how to end it creatively because you can start out like you said, like that first 30 seconds, really capturing them with creativity. But then at the end, sometimes I feel like that creativity has kind of just seeped its way out all the way. And by the time I get to the end, it's like, all right, how do I end this creatively?
Got it. I misunderstood your question. So yeah, so I think the way you end it creatively is like me personally, like I want to make my ending. I want to make my ending like a little simpler, because like a lot of times when you see poems, really really good poems, they start off they start off kind of simple, and then the meat of it, like the middle of it, is really like dope creative metaphors, and then typically like when you bring that, like the end of the poem is when you bring the message on home, right? So you kind of want that to be really digestible. Like it's like, oh, I want to capture y'all with this creativity, but like at the end of the day, I want y'all to understand what I'm saying. Uh, so, like, I would like you don't have to do this, but this is what I do. I like try to capture somebody in the beginning of my pieces, whether that's Jesus is God, and I dare you tell me otherwise. It's like, man, okay, let me hear what this guy got to say, or whether that's with a wild factor or creative line or whatever. In the middle of my poem, I try to like communicate my message in a creative way. But at the end of my poem, I try to not necessarily dumb it down, but make it a little simpler so people can digest. Okay, this is what I want you to walk away with. Because the end of the poem is very, very important. It's like I think at the end of the day, if you dumb it down a little bit so people can walk away with what you're trying to communicate, that's good. It doesn't have to be like A B C D like in elementary poetry, but it can be simple so people can say, okay, you know what, I walked away with this. Uh, so you don't necessarily have to try to match the creativity from the end of the poem to the middle, or the beginning. You really don't. You can dumb it down a little bit for the sake of the audience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any more questions? No? Well, man, I want to thank you guys for coming. I was all over the place today. My wife's out of town, so I had this little girl all day by myself. She drove me crazy, but she's the joy of my life. Say hey, Eden. Say hey. Yeah, but thank you guys for joining in. I really appreciate you guys' gift. I really appreciate you guys writing. Keep writing, man. I truly believe in all of you guys. I think all of you guys have an amazing, amazing gift. And I'm excited, man, to see what you guys gonna do at Legacy. I know people gonna go crazy. Last year, the poetry slam was like, it was a lot of energy in the place. People were going crazy, and I know this year it's gonna be really really dope. So I'm grateful to be able to work with you guys. Thank you for hearing me out. Yeah, thank you guys. So man, I'm just gonna pray, and we're gonna end it like that. All right. Dear God, I thank you for this day. Thank you, God, for this time. I thank you, God, for each writer that was chosen. God, we prayed and asked you, God, to just allow us to pick the right writers, and I believe with your help we did. I pray, Father, that this time was fruitful, that somebody walked away and learning something. I pray that I would just apply the things that I even learned from them, God. And yeah, I just pray, God, that you will encourage them, even in their writing process, to write a poem that's effective, creative, but yet has the hope of the gospel, God. I pray, Father, for each poet that you will just continue to encourage them in their gifts and in their talents, God, to represent you to the best of their abilities um, with your help and with your strength. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate you guys. They go Itohan.
Bye, y'all.
Love y'all, man. One. Thank you.